Today we're looking at skill classification. We're hoping to demonstrate the ability to classify different skills, understand that skills can be classified along various different continuums, and as a result of that, you should be able to name the continuums, the terms used at either end of the continuums, what the continuums mean, and where you would place certain skills along each of the continuums. So our first continuum is the muscular control continuum. At either end, we've got gross and fine. And this continuum is measuring gross skills using large muscle movements associated with strength, with endurance, with power-based activities. At the other end of the scale, we've got fine skills. These use small, delicate muscle movements associated with speed, with accuracy, possibly more efficient movements. And at the top, so we've got an example of a gross being weightlifting, and we've got an example of a fine being maybe darts or snooker based. Our second continuum is the environmental influence continuum. At one end we have open skills, the other end we have closed skills. Open skills require perceptual monitoring, so the performer perceives the information and that stimulates the skill response. These occur in an unpredictable environment. The form of action is constantly being varied according to what's happening around the performer, and there's no clear beginning or end. Usually they're externally paced open skills. At the other end of the scale, we've got closed skills. These are pre-learned and habitual, so well learned. They usually occur in the autonomous phase of learning, so we're talking at a high level performers. No external requirements. They have a clear beginning and end, and they occur in a very predictable environment. The more predictable the environment, the more closed it becomes. And the technical requirements of the skill conform to a particular model. So it's kind of the textbook model, the way it's being performed. So an example of an open skill would be a football goalkeeper saving the ball. An example of a closed skill would be a shot put. In fact, if it was a shot put in practice by an elite performer, that would make it even more closed. In fact, even indoor would make it closed again, just to take away any kind of external influences that might be upon it. The next one is the continuity continuum. Now, it's a slightly more unusual one. As you look at the top, you've got discrete, we have serial in the middle, and we've got continuous. And hopefully by the end of this slide, you'll understand a little bit why. Now, discrete skills have a clear beginning and end. They can be performed by themselves without linking to any other skills. It can be repeated, but the performer would have to start again to repeat it. So once you've finished, they'd have to go back to the beginning for a discrete skill. Now, a serial skill has a number of discrete skills which are linked together quite closely into a kind of a performance consisting of various different phases. The one used at the top there is the high jump. Triple jump would be another one where there are obvious phases that are linked together. And finally, continuous skills at the other end that cannot be split up into subroutines or any kind of distinguishable parts, but they last a relatively long time. In fact, generally as long as the performer wishes. For example, running, basketball dribbling, cycling, those types of skills. And the only one I haven't mentioned is discrete skill being, for example, weightlifting and javelin throw we've got for discrete skills. So we've got the pacing continuum. The pacing continuum has externally paced at one end and self-paced at the other end. Externally paced skills, the speed and the precision which the skill is executed are controlled by the environment, the surroundings of the performer. Opposing teams or other individuals within the game, or the weather or wind conditions. As you can see, we've used yachting as an example of an externally paced skill, very much influenced by the wind itself. At the other end, we have the self-paced skills. The rate of action is controlled entirely by the performer. For example, a weightlifter decides when they're going to lift the weight. We next have the difficulty continuum. We have simple at one end, we have complex at the other. Simple skills are very straightforward skills. They have very few subroutines, and they don't require very much concentration or cognitive activity from the performer. They're just very easy to actually complete the skills themselves. At the other end of the scale, we have complex skills, which are much more complicated. They require a lot of attention, a lot of practice. the complexity of which can be perceived differently by different individuals. So it could be more complex for one person than perhaps another. They require a large number of interlinked subroutines, some of which may be habitual and learned, which would affect the ease in which the performer performs the skill. Right, so there's a lot to it. For example, a gymnastic floor exercise, it will, a routine with a number of different components to it. At the other end of the scale, sprinting is considered to be quite a simple skill with very few subroutines. And finally, we're looking at the organizational continuum. So we have low organization at one end, high organization at the other end. Skills with low organization are uncomplicated. They've got little organizational structure. Now, subroutines themselves tend to be discrete skills. We'll go back to our discrete slide to find out what that means, and can be practiced separately. Skills with a high organization have a complex organizational structure. The subroutines themselves are closely linked, and therefore they cannot be practiced separately. The skill must be practiced as a whole thing. This requires far more attention and concentration to be performed successfully. For example, a pole vault or a gymnastic move would be a high organization skill. At the other end of the continuum, we have swimming, strokes, and cycling, quite uncomplicated, require much less concentration and attention.